Hey friends, tonight let's drift back in time, not to the age of dinosaurs, but to the world that came after them, a quieter, greener Earth, where giant mammals roamed through endless forests, where the first whales returned to the sea, and where our ancient ancestors took their very first steps beneath the golden sun. The dinosaurs may have gone, but life didn't stop, it reinvented itself. The Cenozoic era was like nature's calm after the storm, a time when Earth learned to breathe again. Imagine the air thick with warmth, birds filling the skies once ruled by pterosaurs, and strange creatures like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats shaping the planet's next great chapter. If you enjoy calm science journeys like this, a gentle like or subscribe helps this little world of sleepy science grow. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? I love seeing how far this cozy community reaches across the world. So put on your headphones, close your eyes, and let's wander softly through the Cenozoic, the age of mammals, memories, and quiet miracles of life. The world was quiet when the age of the dinosaurs came to an end. The last echoes of their footsteps faded into the dust, and the earth seemed to exhale. From that long sigh began the Cenozoic era, a stretch of time that would cradle the growth of mammals, the rise of forests, and the slow, graceful shaping of the world we now know. 66 million years ago, sunlight returned to a planet covered in shadow. For months, maybe years, the sky had been dark with ash after the great impact that ended the Cretaceous. But slowly, light began to seep through again, warm and gold. The earth healed in silence. The oceans calmed. The forests, though thinned, began to grow new leaves. It was the dawn of a gentler time, and though it would see many changes, mountains rising, climates cooling, species coming and going, it was an age filled with renewal. The name Cenozoic means recent life, and indeed, it was here that the roots of the modern world took hold. In the early days of this new era, the air was warm and heavy, and much of the planet was wrapped in dense forests. From the equator to the poles, green life reached far and wide. Palm trees once swayed near Alaska. Crocodiles basked where snow now falls. The warmth was deep and steady, like a soft heartbeat under the soil. The continents were already on the move, gliding slowly atop the mantle. South America still drifted apart from North America, an island continent filled with strange creatures. Australia was journeying north, carrying with it the early ancestors of kangaroos and wombats. India was still pushing into Asia, a slow collision that would soon lift the Himalayas skyward. It was an earth in motion, yet the movement was so patient that no creature could see it. Mountains did not grow in moments, they rose in whispers. The world changed by degrees, one small step at a time, as if nature herself were breathing deeply between heartbeats. The first chapter of this new age is called the Paleocene epoch. It began in the stillness after the storm, around 66 million years ago, and lasted about 10 million years. Life crept back into the empty spaces. Tiny mammals that had once hidden in burrows and trees during the age of dinosaurs now began to explore the open world. They were small and cautious at first, creatures like Purgatorius, an early primate-like animal, and Pantalambda, a soft-footed herbivore that roamed the forest floor. None of them were giants, none of them yet roared, but they were curious, warm-blooded, and alive in a way that felt new. In the undergrowth, insects hummed softly. The air smelled of damp leaves and soil. Every sunrise was a beginning. The oceans, too, were reborn. Coral reefs began to grow again in clear tropical waters. New fish glided through the sea's green light. Among them swam the ancestors of whales, though they still had legs and walked upon the shore. Pachycetus, one of the earliest of them, waded through shallow rivers, hunting small fish, not yet knowing that its descendants would one day roam the open ocean. The earth was warming, gently and steadily. Carbon dioxide in the air kept the planet cozy, and lush forests spread farther toward the poles than they ever would again. The world was like a great greenhouse filled with life and light, but this warmth was not forever. Nature, ever patient, began to shift again. Around 56 million years ago, something stirred deep within the planet. Great amounts of carbon were released, perhaps from volcanoes, perhaps from the thawing of methane trapped beneath the seafloor. The world's temperature rose even higher in what scientists call the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. For a few 100,000 years, Earth was a warm paradise. Tropical forests covered Greenland, ferns unfurled near Antarctica, rain fell in thick curtains across continents, and rivers swelled with warm, slow water. Even the nights glowed with a heavy, humid calm. In this softened world, life bloomed in abundance. The Eocene epoch had begun around 56 million years ago, and with it came an explosion of new forms. Mammals grew larger, bolder. Birds soared through open skies, filling the air with calls that had never been heard before. There were early horses, no bigger than a cat, walking carefully through ferns. There were long-limbed primates leaping from branch to branch in endless green canopies. There were great flightless birds that ran like swift shadows across the plains. And there were forests so thick that sunlight could barely touch the ground. If you could stand there in that deep Eocene forest, you would feel the air wrap around you like silk. You would hear the drip of water on leaves, the call of unseen creatures, the slow rhythm of a planet at peace. The continents were still finding their places. North America and Europe were connected by land, and animals wandered freely between them. Antarctica, though beginning to drift toward the South Pole, was still warm and covered with trees. The oceans lapped gently at wide, shallow shores, and strange new mammals swam within them. Basilosaurus, a serpent-like early whale, long and sleek, gliding through ancient seas. The Eocene world was vibrant, alive with sound and movement. Yet beneath the calm warmth, change was building again. Far to the north, the land between Greenland and Norway began to pull apart. The Atlantic Ocean widened, letting new currents swirl through. Deep beneath the waves, heat shifted the flow of water, changing the balance of the planet's climate. Slowly, over millions of years, Earth began to cool. The lush forest that had reached almost to the poles started to thin. The animals followed the forests as they retreated toward the equator, seeking the warmth that had once been everywhere. By the time the Oligocene epoch arrived, around 34 million years ago, the world was changing shape again. The air grew crisper, the seasons more defined. Antarctica, drifting ever farther south, became isolated by a ring of cold ocean currents. Snow began to fall there for the first time in ages, and it did not melt. The first permanent ice formed on the poles. A quiet whiteness spread, marking the beginning of the world we recognize today. But this cooling did not bring silence. It brought adaptation. Life reshaped itself again, as it always had. In the cooler Oligocene forests, new species emerged. Early elephants with long, downward-curving tusks called Paleomastodon wandered the riverbanks. Small apes swung from trees, their faces bright with intelligence. Grasses began to spread across open lands, their roots gripping the soil in wide networks. These humble plants would change everything, for they would soon give rise to the first great grasslands, where herds could run beneath open skies. The seas were also alive with movement. True whales, fully aquatic now, roamed the depths. Seals and sea lions began their long history along icy coasts. The rhythm of migration began to pulse through the oceans, a slow heartbeat of the living world. Mountains rose higher. The Himalayas, still climbing from the slow push of India into Asia, caught the winds and shaped the monsoon rains. The Andes lifted along South America's western edge, changing weather patterns across an entire continent. Each fold of rock, each uplifted peak, was another whisper of time, millions of years passing in silence, unseen by the eyes of any creature. Through all of this, the Cenozoic remained a place of gentle resilience. Every shift, every changing in climate brought with it new life and new possibilities. By now, the continents were nearly in the positions we know today. The shapes of oceans had begun to resemble the modern map, but the animals that walked the land were still only distant ancestors of those we know. There were no humans yet, not even close. The world belonged to mammals of every kind, nimble runners, tree dwellers, swimmers, and flyers, and though they could not know it, These ancient beings were shaping the very ecosystems that would cradle our own species millions of years later. Imagine the world at the end of the Oligocene. The days are mild, the nights cool. Forests of oak and pine rise where once stood jungles of palms. Herds of early horses graze the edges of grasslands. The air carries the scent of damp earth and new growth. Rivers carve through valleys that gleam under the morning sun. High in the mountains, snow glows faintly blue beneath a pale sky. The earth is breathing more slowly now, its warmth still lingers, but a new rhythm has begun, the rhythm of seasons. When the wind blows across these ancient plains, it carries whispers of what is to come, cooler ages, large animals, and eventually the slow arrival of beings who will wonder about all this, the ones who will look back across time and give these ages names. For now, though, the world is content in its balance. The Cenozoic has only begun, but already it has brought a kind of peace after chaos. It is a time of slow recovery, of patient transformation, of life stretching its limbs after a long sleep. The continents drift, the forests breathe, the oceans murmur softly against the shores, and as the first part of this long era draws toward its middle chapters, the earth stands poised between warmth and coolness, between past and future. It does not rush. It never does. It moves only with the steady grace of time itself. If you listen carefully, somewhere deep beneath the soil, beneath the layers of rock and memory, you can almost hear it, the soft pulse of a planet alive, turning gently toward what comes next. The air had begun to cool. It was not sudden, not sharp, but a slow drift through the long breathing of the planet. The warm, lush forests of the early Cenozoic began to thin, their canopies parting like curtains drawn back to reveal the open sky. Where trees once stood close together, sunlight now touched the ground. Grasses, with their slender leaves and quiet strength, reached upward to claim the light. They were patient plants, born to endure change, and with them came the new rhythm of the Miocene epoch. The Miocene began about 23 million years ago, and the Earth was already well on its way to becoming the world we know. The continents had nearly settled into their places, though they still shifted by inches each year, like slow dancers crossing a grand, silent floor. Mountains were higher, oceans were deeper, winds had new paths to follow, and life, ever adaptable, began to find harmony in this changing world. Across wide plains, the first great grasslands spread like golden seas. Grasses had appeared before, but now they flourished as never before, blanketing entire continents. They were humble yet powerful. Each blade held the secret of survival, strong roots that held soil firm against rain, leaves that could grow again after grazing, and seeds that carried life on the wind. In this new world of open skies, animals learned to run. The forests had once been homes of quiet steps and climbing limbs. Now, on these broad plains, speed became a new language. Herds of small horses, like Merychippus, galloped in long, flowing lines across the open land. Their hooves, once soft and spreading for forest floors, grew harder and more suited for the firm grassland soil. They learned to move together, to read the shifting air for the scent of rain or predator. And where there were runners, there were watchers, the great cats of the Miocene, with long limbs and slender tails, began to prowl the edges of the herds. Their eyes gleamed in the low light of dawn, their movements quiet as wind through tall grass. The balance between hunter and prey grew delicate and constant, a dance as old as time. In Africa, forests still fringed the grasslands, and in their branches, something extraordinary began to stir. Small apes, nimble and curious, swung through the trees. Their hands were strong, their eyes forward, their movements full of thought. The Miocene was the age of the early apes, the ancestors of gorillas, chimpanzees, and long after, of humans. They explored the forests of Kenya and Ethiopia, climbing high to watch the plains below, where herds shimmered in the heat. In this time, the world was full of gentle energy. The air carried the scent of grass and rain. The earth was patterned with rivers that glittered under sunlight. Volcanoes stood quiet for long years, then breathed again, their ash feeding the soil that fed the plants that fed the herds. It was a circle without end, and every living thing was part of it. Far to the north, in Europe and Asia, the land changed as well. The once tropical forests had long retreated, replaced by woodlands and meadows. The air cooled in the winters and warmed in the summers. Seasons became clear and steady, teaching life new rhythms. The animals that lived here learned to adapt, to grow thicker coats, to migrate, to remember the taste of distant valleys when snow covered their home. The oceans were also alive with change. Giant kelp forests swayed beneath cool waves, and marine mammals thrived in the shallows. Whales, once rare and primitive, now roamed the seas in song-filled families. Their bodies had grown enormous, their flippers wide and strong. Some, like the sperm whale, dove deep into the dark where no sunlight reached, hunting giant squid that drifted through the cold waters of the deep sea. Others, like baleen whales, filtered tiny creatures from the water, feeding on the invisible abundance of plankton that bloomed with the changing climate. Seals and sea lions played in the surf, their smooth bodies glinting under the sun. On distant shores, penguins stood like little sentinels, their black and white feathers clean against the rocks. The earth was full of motion, yet the motion was calm, an endless ebb and flow between land and sea, warmth and coolness, day and night. In South America, life took its own curious path. The continent was still an island, cut off from the north by an ocean channel. Here, evolution painted strange and gentle forms. There were great flightless birds called terror birds, tall as men, who stalked the open lands with measured steps. There were giant armadillos with shells like domes of stone. Sloths the size of bears hung from branches or lumbered across the ground. It was a world that followed its own quiet rules, untouched by outside life for millions of years. Australia, drifting farther north, carried its marsupial travellers, ancestors of kangaroos, wombats and koalas. The continent dried slowly, and its forests gave way to bushland and desert. Yet life persisted, shaped by scarcity. Kangaroos learned to move in great leaps, conserving energy across wide sunlit spaces. Wombats burrowed deep to find coolness. Koalas climbed high to sleep through the heat of day, their hearts slow and steady. And far to the south, the white crown of Antarctica grew. The glaciers that had begun in the Oligocene spread their quiet wings. Snow fell endlessly, layer upon layer, pressing the air from ancient ages into bubbles that would one day tell the story of time. Beneath that frozen surface, continents shifted still, unseen, unhurried. The Miocene world was a balance between warmth and cold, between past and future. The tropics still shimmered with heat, yet ice deepened at the poles. Winds blew stronger now, tracing new paths around the Earth, and the oceans carried those changes across the globe. The currents that flow today, like the Gulf Stream and the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, took shape during this time, connecting waters, climates, and life into one vast living system. These winds and waters carried seeds across oceans. They guided migrations, they brought storms that watered plains thousands of miles away. The Earth was learning to breathe in new ways. It was during the Miocene that the first modern ecosystems began to appear. The great African savannas opened wide, shimmering in golden light. Herds of antelopes, elephants, and early giraffes moved across them, followed by lions and hyenas whose ancestors had only just begun to sharpen their instincts. In Asia, bamboo forests spread, home to the first panda-like bears. In North America, wide prairies rolled under blue skies, where herds of camels and early bison grazed in peace. Above all, the world was growing quieter. The roaring volcanoes of the early Cenozoic had calmed. The great waves of extinction had faded. It was a time not of chaos, but of calm creation. Evolution worked slowly, sculpting creatures and landscapes in gentle detail. High in the sky, flocks of birds moved together, tracing long lines over continents. They followed invisible roads of air, carried by instinct and wind. Their wings flashed like silver in the sun, and as they flew, their calls echoed faintly over forests and plains. The first true songbirds began to fill the mornings with melody, each note a reminder that life could be both wild and peaceful. In the Miocene seas, coral reefs grew brighter. Tiny creatures built vast structures of calcium and light, homes for fish of every colour. Turtles glided through the water like drifting leaves. Sharks patrolled the depths, including one that became a legend in time, the megalodon, the largest shark that ever lived. It hunted great whales in the open ocean, a shadow moving beneath waves. Yet even this giant was part of the balance, part of the slow pulse of the living sea. The Miocene lasted almost 18 million years. In that long span, continents connected and climates changed again. Near the end of this epoch, the land bridge between North and South America began to rise. Volcanoes and shifting plates built the first ridges of what would become Central America. Soon animals would cross that bridge, giant sloths heading north, elephants and horses heading south. The world was knitting itself together again, and above all this, the sky remained wide and constant. Daylight drifted across oceans, painting waves in soft silver. Night followed gently, bringing stars like cold embers scattered through endless black. The earth turned slowly beneath them, patient and alive. By the time the Pliocene epoch began, about 5 million years ago, the stage was set for the final transformations of the Cenozoic. But the Miocene remained the heartbeat beneath it all, the time when life found its rhythm, when grass first sang with wind, and when the shapes of today's world were born in quiet patience. If you could stand in a Miocene field at dusk, the air would hum with insects. The horizon would shimmer with heat. You might see herds moving in the distance, their silhouettes soft against the fading light. A river might whisper nearby, carrying the scent of silt and rain. Above you a bird would circle once, twice, and glide away into the deepening blue. Everything would feel timeless, unhurried. The earth itself would seem to sleep lightly beneath your feet. Every grain of soil, every leaf, every breath of wind would tell a story of survival and change, written not in words but in the quiet passage of time. And as darkness settled, you would know that the Miocene, though long gone, still lingers in every field of grass, every gust of wind, every echo of life that moves across the land today. The world we walk upon still carries the memory of that calm, endless age, an age when the earth learned how to rest and life learned how to move with grace. The stars above the Miocene skies were the same stars we see now. They watched over oceans and mountains, over forests and plains, over the slow, peaceful turning of time. The earth was younger, but its dreams were already old. The grasses sighed under the wind, the rivers shimmered in moonlight, and the world turned softly toward its next chapter. The warmth of the Miocene began to drift away, as softly as breath on a cold morning. The earth turned a little slower, and the air began to whisper with the promise of change. The great grasslands remained, wide and golden, but a chill began to creep through the wind. Seasons grew sharper. The sun's warmth lingered less, and frost began to trace pale fingers across the edges of the world. This was the Pliocene epoch, beginning around 5 million years ago, a time of gentle cooling, slow evolution, and quiet preparation for the coming cold. The continents stood much as they do now. North and South America had finally joined hands through the narrow isthmus of Panama. This thin bridge of land changed everything. It rerouted the flow of oceans, guiding warm waters up into the Atlantic, deepening the chill of the Pacific and feeding the birth of great currents that shaped the modern climate. With those shifting seas came new winds, new rains, and new ways of life. The Pliocene was a world of contrast, warm still in the tropics, but cool and crisp near the poles. Forests gave way to meadows, meadows to grasslands, and grasslands to the first tundras of the north. The air smelled of dry soil and the faint sweetness of autumn leaves. Snow began to stay longer on mountain peaks. The earth was learning to wear the colours of winter. Across the savannas of Africa, herds of antelope and elephant wandered under a pale blue sky. Lions crouched low in the tall grass, their eyes steady and golden. The ground trembled faintly beneath the steps of rhinos, hippos, and the first great herds of early bison. It was a world in motion, yet the motion was calm, almost rhythmic. The turning of hooves, the quiet thunder of migrations, the soft hiss of wind through the grass. In the shadows of these open plains, a new kind of creature began to move. It was not the largest or the strongest, but something different, something curious. These were the early hominins, our distant ancestors. They stood taller than the apes before them, their hands were free. Their eyes scanned the horizon not only for danger, but for wonder. Among them was Australopithecus afarensis, who walked upright through the African light about 3.5 million years ago. Her footprints, pressed into soft volcanic ash in what is now Tanzania, still remain, small human-shaped marks stretching across the ancient earth. Those footprints, like whispers through time, tell us that the journey toward humanity began not with a leap, but with a quiet walk. The Pliocene skies were wide and steady. The days began with cool mornings, the air filled with the cries of birds that followed the shifting seasons. The nights brought stars that gleamed with pale light, untouched by city glow. The world was still wild, still endless. In North America, tall grasses rippled across plains that seemed to go on forever. Herds of horses and camels grazed together, while giant ground sloths wandered slowly through forests at the continent's southern edge. Saber-toothed cats watched from high rocks, their long teeth gleaming faintly in the sun. They were patient hunters, moving only when the shadows lengthened. In Europe, the forest grew cool and damp. Oaks and beeches filled the valleys. Deer picked their way through the undergrowth. Bears dozed through long winters in mountain caves. The rhythm of hibernation, migration, and rest deepened, becoming a pattern that would last for millions of years. Asia stretched vast and varied, from tropical jungles in the south to icy steppes in the north. The great mountains of the Himalayas had risen high now, their snow-capped peaks brushing the thin, cold air. The winds that curved around them shaped the monsoons below, feeding the rivers that carried life across entire continents. Along these rivers, ancient elephants known as mastodons drank deeply. Their tusks curved like the crescent moon. To the east, forests of China held early pandas, their fur thick and soft against the growing chill. In the highlands, ancestors of snow leopards watched from the rocks, silent as the clouds that drifted over the peaks. In South America, the connection with the north had brought great migrations. The quiet island world of the Miocene was gone. Now, new animals arrived from across the rising land bridge. Horses, camels, and bears came south. Giant sloths and armadillos moved north. The two worlds blended, creating a living mosaic of new ecosystems. In the oceans, life shimmered as it always had. The Pliocene seas were rich with movement, schools of fish flashing silver beneath the waves, dolphins leaping through salt-scented air, whales singing low, slow songs that carried for miles through the deep. Coral reefs glowed with colour, alive with countless small creatures, each part of the vast rhythm of the sea. Ices had begun to gather at the poles. It grew quietly, layer by layer, year after year. Antarctica, already cloaked in white, sent cold winds across the southern oceans. In the north, Greenland's mountains began to hold snow that did not melt in summer. The world was tipping slowly toward a colder age, though life continued to thrive beneath the soft sky. The Pliocene was a time of balance, a pause between the warm past and the icy future. It was as if the earth were taking a long, calm breath before the long winter to come. Every continent, every ocean current, every gust of wind was preparing for what lay ahead. In this age, the earth's heartbeat could be felt in the quiet rhythm of migration and return. Birds crossed oceans, following invisible trails written in the air. Whales swam between polar waters and tropical bays. Herds followed the green pulse of grass as it grew and faded with the rains. Everything moved in cycles round and round in harmony with the turning planet. And yet small changes continued to ripple through time. In the grasslands of Africa, those early hominins began to shape the world in ways no other creature had. They picked up stones, simple at first, but tools nonetheless. They cracked nuts, scraped bark, learned to shape the edge of one rock against another. Each spark of thought was quiet but powerful. In their minds flickered the beginnings of understanding, curiosity about the stars above, the fire within, the path ahead. The Pliocene wind would have carried their laughter, their calls across open plains. It would have brushed over their faces as they watched the sun set beyond the acacia trees. They lived within the rhythm of nature, still part of it, still small beneath its endless sky. But within them the story of tomorrow had begun. Elsewhere the world shifted in its quiet way. The Arctic Circle, once green and lush, began to fade into white. The first hints of permafrost formed in the soil. Ice crept down from the mountains. Rivers changed their courses. Lakes deepened in valleys carved by glaciers that were still only whispers of what would come. The creatures of the Pliocene adapted without hurry. Wolves grew thicker coats. Deer learned to travel farther for food. Mammoths, the great shaggy cousins of elephants, appeared in the north, their curved tusks gleaming as they walked through snow-dusted grasslands. They were built for cold, wrapped in layers of fur and fat, their great hearts beating slow and steady beneath the frost. And still, the sun rose each day. It spilled gold across the plains, lit the peaks of ice and warmed the seas. Clouds drifted in long, gentle patterns. Rain fell in curtains that shimmered like silver threads. The air smelled of wet stone and grass. Time passed not in hours or years, but in rhythms, the slow pulse of the planet, the patient unfolding of change. The Pliocene lasted for nearly 3 million years. Through all that time, the world grew quieter and cooler, preparing for what scientists would one day call the Pleistocene epoch, the Age of Ice. But before that age began, the earth paused in beauty. The forest glowed amber in the afternoon sun. The rivers whispered softly to the sea. The nights were deep and still, filled with the low calls of animals and the distant crash of waves against unseen shores. If you could stand there near the end of the Pliocene, you would see a world both familiar and strange. The shapes of the continents would be the same, but the life upon them would feel ancient and new all at once. You might see an early human ancestor watching the sky, hand resting on a stone, eyes reflecting starlight. You might see herds moving beneath the moon, their breath rising in clouds of silver mist. You might hear the soft rustle of leaves as the wind passed through, a sound unchanged in all the millions of years between then and now. The earth, as always, was changing with patience. The Cenozoic had been warm and bright for so long, but now, at the edge of this epoch, it began to gather its quiet strength. It was preparing to sleep beneath ice, to dream of fire and frost and new beginnings. And as the Pliocene drifted into its final centuries, the air grew colder still. Snow fell where it had never fallen before. The seas drew back, locked in ice. The nights lengthened. The stars shone harder in the clear sky. Yet even in the growing chill, life endured, calm, steady, and full of wonder. The earth was ready for its next chapter. The quiet before the frost was deep and gentle, like the pause between breaths. And in that stillness, the seeds of everything to come, of mammoths and glaciers, of humans and firelight, waited beneath the soil of time. The world turned on. The wind sang softly through the grass, and the ice, patient and bright, began to form. The world grew cold, slowly and deeply, as if the planet itself were drawing a long breath in. The air sharpened. The seas sank. Mountains grew cloaked in white. This was the Pleistocene epoch, beginning about 2.6 million years ago, the Age of Ice. For the first time in millions of years, great sheets of frozen light spread from the poles, moving southward with quiet strength. They carved valleys, shaped mountains, and drew new maps upon the face of the earth. The sun still rose each morning, but it did so over a quieter, paler world. The light had a softer hue, the kind that falls through snow or through the still air of winter. It was the same sun that had warmed the Paleocene forests and the Miocene plains, yet now it looked down upon a colder earth, an earth that glittered in silence. Ice covered much of the northern lands. From the high peaks of Canada to the wide valleys of Europe, glaciers pressed forward, slow and powerful as time itself. They moved inches each year, yet their patience reshaped the planet. Beneath their weight, rocks ground to powder. Rivers shifted. Lakes were born in their wake, blue and clear like pieces of sky that had fallen to the ground. Still, even in this frozen world, life endured. It did not vanish under the ice, it adapted to it. Across the snowy plains of the north roamed mammoths, giants covered in thick brown fur, their curved tusks sweeping gracefully before them like crescents of ivory. They walked in herds, moving through the soft blue light of dawn, their breaths rising in clouds. Their heavy feet pressed the snow into paths that led from river to river, from one patch of grass to another. Beside them moved woolly rhinoceroses, broad and strong, their shaggy coats dusted with frost. Great herds of bison grazed on icy steppes where the wind never stopped blowing. And above them the sky was crossed by flocks of birds, long lines of wings tracing the horizon, heading for places where warmth still lingered. Predators followed in their wake. Saber-toothed cats with their long, gleaming teeth hunted the herds across the open tundra. Packs of dire wolves moved in silent formation, their eyes bright with the reflection of the moon. Even in the deep cold, their breath steamed like small fires against the night. It was a hard world, but also a beautiful one, calm, vast, and full of rhythm. The seasons turned with deep precision. Winters stretched long and silent. Summers came brief and bright, bursting with wild flowers and buzzing insects. During those precious months of light, the ice pulled back just a little, revealing green valleys where animals gathered to feed and rest. The whole earth seemed to breathe with that cycle, in and out, freeze and thaw, silence and sound. Far to the south, where the ice did not reach, life flourished in gentler forms. In Africa, the savannas spread wider than before. Golden grass rippled beneath the warm wind. The rivers glittered under clear skies. Elephants walked through the acacia trees, their trunks trailing through dust that caught the light like gold. Here, amid the balance of warmth and coolness, something new was unfolding. The early humans, members of the genus Homo, had begun to appear. They were not yet the humans of cities and songs, but the beginnings of what we would become. Homo habilis shaped stones into tools, striking one against another to make sharp edges. Homo erectus learned to use fire, a spark stolen from lightning or from burning branches, held close against the chill of night. For the first time, warmth was something they could keep. Fire changed everything. Its light stretched the day. Its heat softened food. Its glow drew families close and kept the darkness at bay. The Pleistocene nights were long, but by the fire time felt slower, safer. The sound of wind outside the cave mixed with the crackle of flame. Shadows danced on stone walls. Above them the stars shone cold and ancient, the same stars that had watched over the first forests, the first oceans, the first dawns of Earth. The humans watched them too. Perhaps they wondered, as we do, what stories those lights might tell. They learned to travel, to hunt together, to cross rivers and mountains in search of food. They followed herds across frozen plains, moving with the rhythm of the seasons. The world was large, yet they found their place within it. In Europe and Asia, the ice lay heavy over the land, but life pressed close along its edges. There were reindeer, quiet and graceful, whose hooves clicked softly on frozen ground. There were musk oxen, their fur thick as clouds. In the deep forest that survived between the glaciers, bears slept through the winters, their hearts slowing to match the stillness around them. The Pleistocene was not a single long winter. It was a song of changing verses, cycles of cold and warmth, of ice advancing and retreating. Over and over, for more than 2 million years, the Earth moved between these two states. Ice would grow for tens of thousands of years, then melt away again, flooding valleys and forming new rivers. Every change left its mark, in stone, in soil, in the memory of the living world. When the ice retreated, the land beneath it was reborn. Forests returned to the north. Flowers bloomed in soil newly rich with minerals ground from ancient rock. Rivers ran bright and wild, carving fresh paths through valleys that had been hidden for ages. The sound of melting ice was like 1,000 springs awakening at once, a music of drops and streams and the quiet rush of rebirth. But always, the cold would return, the glaciers would creep forward again, erasing what they had given, testing every living thing that remained. And yet, each time life adapted. The planet's patience never failed. In the seas, too, the Pleistocene played its rhythm. Whales followed the currents between poles and tropics, singing deep songs that rolled through miles of water. Seals gathered on the edges of ice floes, their bodies round and warm, their eyes bright. Penguins huddled in colonies under a pale southern sun. Even in the chill of polar oceans, life flourished, slow-moving, resilient, timeless. In the Pacific, coral reefs persisted in warm shallows, sheltering fish of impossible colour. Along the shores of what would one day be California, kelp forests waved in gentle currents, home to sea otters who floated on their backs, their fur thick enough to keep them warm in cold waves. Everywhere the balance of warmth and ice created beauty, quiet, repeating, patient. And through it all, humans continued to change. They grew taller, stronger, more aware. They learned to track stars to find their way. They painted stories on cave walls, deer and horses, handprints, spirals of light and shadow. Their art was a kind of memory, a whisper to the future. They did not know they were recording the end of an age, but perhaps they felt it, the long calm before the thaw. Toward the end of the Pleistocene, the ice began its final retreat. Around 12,000 years ago, the glaciers melted back once more, faster this time. The air warmed. The great mammoths wandered their last paths across the tundra. The saber-toothed cats grew fewer. Forests spread north again, filling the empty space the ice left behind. Lakes widened. Rivers ran free. The last mammoths on Earth lived on a small island in the Arctic Ocean, Wrangel Island, where they survived thousands of years longer than anywhere else. There, beneath low skies and drifting snow, they lived quietly until about 4,000 years ago. Their footsteps were the final echoes of the Pleistocene. Fading gently into the dawn of the world we call home, the ice sheets melted into oceans that rose and reshaped the coasts. Valleys once filled with glaciers became green and fertile. Human tribes followed the retreating herds, settling in new lands, planting seeds, building fires not just for warmth but for gathering. The age of hunters gave way slowly to the age of cultivators, a new rhythm for the earth. But long after the glaciers were gone, the memory of them remained. You can still see it in the shape of mountains, in the smooth stones of riverbeds, in the deep lakes that fill ancient hollows. You can feel it in the cool breath of morning mist, in the patience of the planet's pulse. The Pleistocene was a time of endurance, a time when life held its breath through cold and found beauty in survival. The wind that whispered across those frozen plains still moves through the grass today. The rivers that melted from glaciers still flow beneath our bridges. The same stars that guided early humans still glow above us, unchanged, infinite. When the world thawed and spring came once more to the earth, it was as if time itself sighed in relief. The forests burst into green. The seas shimmered with life. The songs of birds returned to every dawn. And with that, the Cenozoic reached its quiet crescendo, the long story of life's recovery and renewal after the age of dinosaurs, brought full circle beneath the soft light of a warming sun. But the ice never truly left. Even now it waits in the poles, in the high mountains, in the heart of glaciers that still creep forward one slow inch at a time. The earth remembers, it always remembers. The Pleistocene ended, but its calm still lingers in the air, in every winter snowfall, in every cold morning breath, in every whisper of frost that touches the edge of spring. It is the memory of resilience, of patience, of time moving with quiet grace. And as night settles over the earth, as the stars look down once more on oceans, forests and plains, the story of the Ice Age becomes a lullaby, a song of cold and warmth, of endurance and light, of a planet that never stops breathing even in the deepest silence. The world exhaled. The ice pulled back, retreating into silence. From its long breath of cold, the earth awoke again, slow, gentle, radiant. It was about 12,000 years ago, the beginning of the Holocene epoch, the age we still live in now. After millions of years of change, the planet finally found warmth again. The sun seemed closer. The air shimmered with softness. The rivers sang as they ran free of their icy bindings. Forests returned, stretching wide across continents like green oceans. Where glaciers had once lain heavy and still, now birches and pines rose, their young leaves trembling in the wind. Moss covered the stones that the ice had left behind. Flowers bloomed in colours no one had seen in ages. The air smelled of soil and sunlight, of beginnings. In the north, lakes sparkled in hollows once filled with frozen weight. In the south, deserts shifted and sighed under gentler skies. Everywhere the earth seemed to hum with quiet life. The Holocene was not just an ending to the Ice Age, it was a soft rebirth, a long, patient healing. The great mammoths and saber-toothed cats were gone, their echoes lingering in the wind, yet their place was not empty for long. New lives filled the meadows and valleys. Deer, elk and boar wandered the green forests. Birds sang from every treetop, and warblers, finches, cranes, their songs weaving through the morning air like threads of gold. Bees drifted among the flowers, carrying the soft dust of new creation. And among all of this, humans walked. They were still few, still humble, but they had learned much. The ice had taught them to survive. The fire had taught them to dream. Now, in this Gietla world, they began to build. Along riverbanks, they shaped clay into bowls. They planted seeds and waited, learning the patience of the earth. In the fields of the Fertile Crescent, the first stalks of wheat swayed under the sun. In China, rice sprouted in shallow water. In the Americas, corn unfurled its green leaves toward the sky. Humanity had discovered agriculture, the art of working with time itself. This was the quiet revolution of the Holocene, not made of battles or thunder, but of soil and sun and the slow rhythm of growth. It was a partnership between people and planet. For the first time, humans settled in one place, building villages where the fire burned through the night. The stars above remained the same ones that had watched the mammoths cross the snow, but now they shone over the first fields, the first gardens, the first stories told beside the hearth. The night became a friend again, a place of song, of memory, of hope. Forests thickened across Europe and Asia, their branches arching over the heads of deer and wolves. Rivers like the Nile and the Tigris carried life across dry lands, feeding not just the soil but the beginnings of civilization. The Holocene world was gentle yet full of energy, a living, breathing mosaic of colour and sound. Where the glaciers had melted, oceans rose, reshaping the coasts. Islands formed, shorelines moved inland. What had once been plains turned to bays, and mountains found their reflections in new seas. The planet was always moving, even in its calmest hours. In those early Holocene days, people began to paint more, not just on cave walls, but on pottery, on wood, on themselves. They carved the patterns of the world they saw, spirals like shells, lines like rivers, shapes like leaves. The art was not only decoration, it was memory. It was their way of saying, we were here, and we watched the earth breathe. In time, villages grew into towns, towns into cities, each one built near water, for the rivers were still the lifeblood of everything. The flow of water was the rhythm of time. Every season had its song, the planting rains, the summer heat, the harvest wind. The Holocene's warmth was steady but not still. The earth moved in small patterns, cool centuries and warm ones, dry years and wet. Yet compared to the ice ages before, it was a time of balance. Life thrived in that balance. Forests covered much of the land. Coral reefs bloomed beneath the clear seas. Great herds of antelope crossed the grasslands of Africa, their hooves whispering in dust that caught the sunlight. High in the northern tundra, where some ice still lingered, herds of reindeer wandered under long summer suns. The air smelled of moss and wild herbs. Rivers wound like ribbons of silver through the valleys, carrying the memory of glaciers past. The Holocene was a world of warmth and memory. Even as new things grew, the traces of the old world remained, in the shape of the hills, in the stones beneath the soil, in the ancient paths that rivers followed. Time had not erased the past. It had layered it gently, one age resting upon another like folded silk. Humans learned to listen to the world's small details. They followed the stars to know when to plant. They watched the flight of birds to sense the seasons. They found rhythm in the rising and falling of tides, in the beating of drums, in the wind brushing through leaves. Their stories, songs, and languages grew out of the same quiet wonder that once filled the oceans and forests. In the Pacific, islands shimmered like emeralds upon the sea. Polynesian voyagers, guided by stars and waves, began to cross vast distances in canoes carved from trees that had grown under soft rain. Their journeys followed the rhythm of the moon, the pull of the tide, the memory of wind on skin. They were not explorers of conquest, they were children of the ocean learning to read its voice. Elsewhere, the Holocene unfolded like a slow sunrise over continents. The Sahara was once green, dotted with lakes and rivers. Elephants and hippos roamed its valleys, and early humans drew them on stone with pigments made from earth. Farther north, ice melted from Scandinavia, revealing new land that stretched toward the Arctic Circle. Spruce and pine began their patient march northward following the warmth. In the Americas, glaciers melted from the Rocky Mountains, feeding great rivers like the Columbia and the Mississippi. Forests spread through the valleys. Mammoths vanished, but in their place came bison, strong, dark, moving like shadows through the tall grass. Wolves followed them and eagles watched from the sky. Everywhere the planet was learning to live in its new skin. The Holocene did not rush. It was a time that unfolded gently, in rhythms of centuries. In those quiet ages, humans made tools of bronze and then iron. They raised temples, wrote songs, and told stories that reached across generations. They built with stone and light. They watched the stars and imagined gods and patterns in their movement. The Earth, meanwhile, continued its slow dance, its axis tilting, its orbit stretching, its continents still drifting. Volcanoes still spoke now and then, their smoke curling into the calm sky. Oceans whispered against cliffs, shaping them grain by grain. The world was not frozen anymore, yet it still carried the patience of ice. The gentle warmth of the Holocene allowed forests to grow thick enough to breathe deeply. Each leaf was a soft machine of light, capturing sunlight, turning air into life. The forests were the lungs of the new world, and through them the planet exhaled peace. Even now, when you walk through a forest, you can feel that same rhythm, the heartbeat of an age that began 12,000 years ago. The whisper of leaves is the whisper of time itself. As the Holocene continued, people began to look beyond the horizon. They built boats, wheels, roads. They crossed mountains and oceans, following curiosity like a compass. Yet even in their movement, they carried the stillness of the earth, the deep rhythm of a planet that had learned to rest. In the warmth of this epoch, the sea level rose to where it rests today. The continents took their familiar shapes. The climate found its gentle balance, not too hot, not too cold, the perfect cradle for life as we know it. In every corner of the planet, the memory of the ice remained, not as fear, but as wisdom. The glaciers had carved the valleys that now held rivers. The cold had taught patience, and now, in the long calm of the Holocene, life flourished because of that patience. As night falls over this world of forests and rivers, the air grows cool again. The stars rise above ancient mountains. Their light falls softly on oceans, on deserts, on cities built where rivers once ran wild. Every star is older than the Cenozoic, older than the Earth itself, yet still they shine, marking the same hours, keeping the same watch. The Holocene continues in every breath you take, in every gust of wind that carries the scent of rain, in every heartbeat that matches the planet's quiet rhythm. And though ages may pass and climates may shift again, the story of this warm green world remains written in the soil. The stone and the sky, a lullaby of balance and time. The Cenozoic began with chaos and ended in calm. It began with fire and found peace in sunlight and rain. In this soft age of warmth, the earth rests, its heart still beating beneath us, steady, slow, eternal. The rivers hum the same song they have always sung, the oceans breathe in long, deep sighs, and the forests whisper to the wind that life, after all, is patient. And so the Holocene unfolds, an age of memory, of gentle transformation of light. The warmth lingers in every dawn. The planet glows with quiet wonder, and beneath the wide, calm sky, life continues its gentle dream. The warmth held steady, the earth had found its rhythm, and the Holocene moved onward in slow, golden light. Rivers flowed through green valleys, coasts shimmered in the sun, and mountains stood like quiet keepers of time. It was a world balanced between memory and possibility. The air was calm, the days long, and life moved with a kind of gentle patience. Humans, once wanderers across open plains, now lingered near water. the ancient companion of life. They built homes from clay and reeds, from wood and stone. They tended crops, kept animals, watched the sky. Villages became towns, and towns grew into cities that gleamed beneath the same stars that had once watched mammoths walk the snow. The rivers were their guides. The Nile, Tigris, Euphrates, Indus, and Yellow River. All were the lifelines of early civilization. Their floods were not feared but celebrated, bringing rich soil that glowed like gold in the sun. When the waters receded, farmers planted seeds in the dark, moist earth and waited for the whisper of green to return. Each sprout was a promise, each harvest a quiet victory. In Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, people built ziggurats that reached toward the heavens. Their bricks held the warmth of the day and the cool of the night. Smoke rose from cooking fires, mingling with the songs of shepherds in the distance. Writing began here, small marks pressed into clay, recording the pulse of life, harvests, rains, births, dreams. It was the language of memory taking shape, the earth's story being written by human hands. Farther west, along the Nile, the rhythm of life flowed like the river itself. Each year its flood spread across the land, leaving behind silt that shimmered under the sun. The people who lived there watched the cycle, flood, sowing, harvest, and built their world around it. They carved temples to honor the balance between land and water, between sunlight and moonlight. The Holocene air was filled with the scent of crops and flowers, with the song of insects in fields, with the distant lowing of cattle in the evening. The world was still vast and open, yet more connected now. Across the Mediterranean, sails caught the wind. Across Asia, paths formed between mountains and valleys. People carried stories as much as they carried goods. The planet watched, quiet but alive. Forests stretched wide over Europe, filled with oak, beech, and pine. Wolves and bears roamed the edges of human settlements, curious but cautious. The night belonged to their eyes, glowing softly in the dark. In the morning, mist rose from rivers, wrapping the trees in silver. The dawn chorus began, the calls of blackbirds, thrushes, and doves, a sound older than any city, a lullaby older than speech. The earth had settled into its own slow heartbeat. After the long, cold patience of the Pleistocene, this new age felt almost like a dream. Rain fell softly on fields. Snow gathered in gentle flakes on the high mountains, feeding streams that ran down to valleys rich with life. The oceans were calm and full. Whales followed ancient routes across the blue, and dolphins leapt beside the bows of wooden ships, as if greeting new travellers on old seas. In the east, beyond great deserts and forests, the lands of China and Southeast Asia thrived with rice and bamboo. People there learned to shape bronze, to cast bells that rang in deep, mellow tones across misty valleys. The sound of those bells echoed through centuries, gentle, patient, a music that matched the rhythm of rain. And in the far reaches of the Pacific, the islands continued to bloom. Coral reefs glowed beneath the surface of clear lagoons. Sea turtles drifted through soft currents, their flippers moving like wings through liquid air. Palm trees leaned toward the sea, their leaves rustling like whispers of time. The Holocene Ocean was generous. Fish filled the shallows, and plankton shimmered like stars beneath the waves. Every tide was a heartbeat, a pulse of the planet. The moon drew the water back and forth, as it had since the first oceans formed. Even now that rhythm has never ceased. The rise and fall, the endless breathing of the sea. On the continents, the forests continued their patient work. Each tree pulled light into life, drawing carbon from the air, sending oxygen back. Each root reached deep into the earth, holding soil in place, keeping the land alive. The forests were not just the lungs of the planet, they were its quiet memory, its keepers of peace. In the cool northern lands, pine forests spread wide and silent, their needles soft underfoot. In tropical regions, rainforests unfurled with layers of green, vines, ferns, flowers blooming in the warm, wet air. The calls of birds echoed through the canopy, and the hum of insects filled the spaces between. It was a living symphony, calm and eternal. Amid all this, humans flourished, but for thousands of years their lives still followed the earth's natural rhythm. The seasons told them when to plant and when to rest. The stars told them when to travel and when to stay. Time moved slowly, measured by the moon's phases and the turning of leaves. The Holocene climate was remarkably stable, not perfectly still, but gentle. There were small shifts, a cool century here, a warm one there, but compared to the ages before, it was like a long summer's evening, stretched across millennia. That stability allowed everything we know to unfold: languages, art, cities, and all the quiet, curious hearts that dreamed beneath the stars. In the high plains of South America, the Andes rose like stone waves, and people learned to grow potatoes and quinoa in the thin air. In Mesoamerica, maize and cacao became part of daily life, woven into stories and ceremonies. Across Africa, drums echoed through the night, marking the passage of seasons and generations. Each sound, each song was part of the same great pattern, the earth remembering itself through its children. The Holocene seas shaped coasts still familiar today. Tides sculpted bays and estuaries. Winds built dunes that danced like living shapes across the desert edges. The world was not static, it was simply peaceful in its motion. Even the quietest breeze carried traces of faraway lands: salt from the sea, pollen from a flower, ash from a distant volcano. The air was a web of stories. There were moments of flame, too, volcanoes rising in gentle sleep, then waking in a breath of fire. When they erupted, ash fell softly for days, blanketing the earth like snow, but even that became part of renewal. Ash feeding new soil, new growth, destruction and rebirth, always intertwined, always slow and sure. The Holocene sky was clear, vast and blue, yet always changing. Clouds drifted in shapes that told weather's tales. Rainbows arched after storms, and lightning flashed across open plains like threads of light, stitching the sky. At night, the Milky Way spread from horizon to horizon, a soft band of memory glowing above all that lived. The constellations guided travellers and dreamers alike. The same stars that once watched the rise of the first fires now watched over temples, ships and fields. Every point of light was a story, and every story was a thread in the great fabric of the Cenozoic, a time when life learned not just to survive but to wonder. And through all of it, the planet remained alive, breathing slowly through seasons and centuries. The Holocene was an age of equilibrium, an age when the warmth of the sun and the coolness of the earth moved in harmony. It was as if the entire planet had entered a meditation after millions of years of motion and change. The mountains, once sharp from ice, now softened with green. Rivers meandered, tracing graceful curves. The oceans glittered beneath gentle skies. The earth, for the first time in eons, seemed to rest in its own light. And within that peace the seeds of tomorrow quietly formed, the beginning of the world we know. The whispers of wind in tall grass, the hum of bees, the pattern of stars, all are remnants of this era's serenity. Every field of wheat, every coral reef, every ripple of calm water carries the memory of that long, slow heartbeat, the one that began when the ice melted and has continued ever since. The Holocene is still here, in every sunrise and rainfall, in every sigh of wind across the ocean. It is the present wrapped around us, a gentle echo of everything that came before. The Cenozoic has been the story of recovery, of adaptation, of life learning to sing again after silence. And in the Holocene, that song reaches its softest verse. The sound of warmth and water, of breath and memory, of peace in motion. Even now, when we close our eyes and listen to the rain, the rustle of leaves, the slow beating of our own hearts, we are hearing the music of the Holocene, the calmest chapter of Earth's long and beautiful dream. The world had settled into a gentle hum. The air was warm, but not weary. The rivers had learned their steady paths, gliding over smooth stones, whispering secrets from the mountains to the sea. Forests rose like living cathedrals, filled with light and silence. The Holocene had matured, not a new world anymore, but a balanced one, breathing in calm unity. Everywhere life worked together in quiet harmony. The ocean sighed with tides, The trees exhaled their invisible gifts, and the winds carried the scent of rain and pollen across the globe. It was as if the planet had woven itself into a single soft fabric, threads of light, water and breath all connected. The oceans, vast and ancient, were the planet's memory. Beneath their blue surface, entire worlds moved in graceful stillness. In the shallow coral reefs, tiny fish darted through gardens of light. Sea anemones swayed gently, their tentacles glowing like lanterns. Turtles drifted through the warm currents, their shells patterned with time. Far below, in the deep, the water turned dark and quiet. Strange creatures glimmered with their own light. Jellyfish, transparent as thought, and small fish with glowing eyes that sparkled like stars in a liquid night. Each current carried warmth or cold from one part of the world to another. The oceans were not still. They were alive with motion, connecting continents, balancing the air above them. When sunlight touched their surface, they breathed warmth into the sky. When the sky wept rain, they gathered it back in calm acceptance. It was an eternal conversation, ocean and air, speaking softly in the language of climate. Along the shores, the tide pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Salt marshes filled and emptied with the moon's pull, and seabirds glided low over the waves, their wings brushing the reflection of the sun. The sound of the sea was timeless, the same whisper that had filled the air since the first Cenozoic dawn. Beyond the coasts, forests continued their patient work. In the equatorial rainforests, the air shimmered with moisture. Leaves caught the morning light, transforming it into energy and colour. The trunks of trees were wrapped in vines, and orchids bloomed high among the branches, their petals soft as breath. Every inch of soil was alive, filled with roots, insects, and tiny movements unseen by the eye. The rainforest never truly slept. Even at night, frogs called softly from pools of shadow, and the air trembled with the hum of life. Lightning flickered in the clouds above, distant and gentle, illuminating the green ocean of trees below. In cooler lands, temperate forests stretched across continents, maples and oaks, birches and firs. Their branches formed green canopies that rustled like 1,000 pages turning at once. Each autumn they let their leaves fall in golden silence, carpeting the ground in warmth before the quiet of winter. Beneath the snow, the roots still listened to the earth's slow heartbeat. In the great grasslands, winds danced across endless seas of gold. Grasses bent and rose again, their movement like breath made visible. Herds of animals moved across these plains, bison, antelope, wildebeest, their migrations ancient as time. The ground trembled softly under their steps, and dust rose into the sunlit air like incense. Predators followed at a distance, not in cruelty but in balance, wolves, lions, cheetahs, keeping the dance of life steady. In these rhythms, there was no hurry. The world turned slowly the same way it always had. Seasons flowed into one another like notes in a calm melody. The snow melted into rivers, the rivers carried life to the seas. Rain fell and forests drank deeply. Every drop found its place. Above it all, the sky remained a wide, watchful eye. The atmosphere, thin and gentle, was a living layer that wrapped the planet in softness. Clouds drifted across it in endless shapes, some light as dreams, others heavy with thunder waiting to be born. Birds traced invisible roads through it, flying from continent to continent, guided by their instinct and starlight. The Holocene was the age when life began to connect in ways more intricate than ever before. Each creature was a thread in a vast design, dependent on the air, the water, the soil, and one another. The forests helped the air breathe. The oceans tempered the heat. The mountains caught the rain and gave it back as rivers. Everything moved in balance, a slow and sacred circle. Humans, too, became part of this great web, not rulers of it, but participants in its song. They learned to cultivate harmony, even if they did not yet know its name. They farmed, fished, and herded. They built homes from the same wood and clay the earth offered. Their fires still flickered under the same constellations their ancestors once watched from caves of stone. Villages grew near forests and coasts. People listened to the seasons as one listens to a story. Spring told of renewal, summer of growth, Autumn of rest, winter of patience. Every year was a cycle, and every cycle was a promise kept. The Holocene sky recorded their story too. Smoke from hearths rose gently each evening, curling into twilight. When night came, stars appeared, calm, bright, eternal. The moon waxed and waned above fields and rivers, its reflection silvering the surface of every pool. The people learned its rhythm, planting by its light, sleeping under its gaze. The balance between life and planet was subtle, but it was real. Forests cooled the air, oceans carried warmth north and south. Animals carried seeds across distances. Even the smallest things mattered. Bees, tiny and tireless, carried the future from flower to flower. Without their work, the fields would have fallen silent, but they did not. The hum continued, and deep beneath the surface, the earth itself remained alive. The crust shifted imperceptibly. Mountains still rose by inches. Volcanoes still murmured under their breath. But the land had grown wise in its calm. After ages of upheaval, the Cenozoic planet now rested between heartbeats. It was a pause, long, slow, filled with peace. The climate of the Holocene carried the memory of ice and the warmth of light in perfect measure. It was not too hot, not too cold, the narrow, gentle balance in which life could flourish. Each breeze, each drop of rain, each sunrise was a part of that balance. In the vast rainforests of the Amazon, rivers moved like liquid mirrors. In the Arctic, icebergs floated like sleeping giants in a sea of blue. On islands across the Pacific, birds with brilliant feathers sang from trees that bent with the wind. On the African plains, the air shimmered with heat and the low calls of elephants drifted through the dusk. Everywhere the world felt whole. It was during these quiet millennia that humans began to notice more than just the survival of life. They began to feel its rhythm. They noticed how the moon guided tides, how the stars moved with the seasons, how the wind carried the scent of rain before it came. They began to understand connection, the invisible thread between all things. Stories arose from that awareness, stories of the sky, the sea, the mountains, the seasons. Myths were not just fantasies, they were gentle ways of describing what science would one day measure. The Holocene human looked at lightning and saw the will of the gods. Today we see the pulse of the atmosphere. Yet both are ways of saying the same thing. The world is alive, and we are part of its breath. Even now, when we walk outside and feel the wind against our face, it is the same air that once touched the leaves of early forests and the waves of the first Holocene seas. The molecules that fill our lungs are ancient, part of a cycle billions of years old. The breath we take is the planet's breath. And though civilization grew, the Earth's calm endured. Temples rose, cities shimmered, ships crossed oceans, and yet the rhythm of the planet remained unchanged. The sun still rose at dawn, the tide still turned at moonrise, the stars still wheeled overhead in their quiet circles. Beneath all the noise of human progress, the Holocene heartbeat continued, patient, ancient, kind. There were storms, of course, and droughts and seasons of change. But the world had learned balance. Its systems worked together, a vast orchestra tuned to perfection by time. When rain fell in one place, another place waited in stillness. When cold descended on one pole, warmth rose at the other. It was all one breathing, one endless inhalation and exhalation of life. The Holocene was, and still is, a masterpiece of stability. For 10,000 years the climate has been kind. The seas nurturing, the air clear. Life has had the rare gift of calm, a chance not just to exist, but to flourish, to think, to feel. And as night falls again over forests and oceans, the same stars that guided early humans now look down on us still. They shine through the same thin veil of air, through the same whispering clouds. They are the constant witnesses to this age of peace, the soft pulse of the Cenozoic, still alive, still glowing in the dark. The story continues, quiet, patient, full of light. The planet sleeps, but never fully. It dreams, and in its dream, every forest breathes, every wave rolls, every creature moves with grace. The Holocene hums beneath us, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. The earth had always known how to move gently between moments. For millions of years it had risen and fallen like the tide of a single breath, warming, cooling, growing, resting. The Holocene was no different. Beneath the quiet forests and calm oceans, small changes began to stir, almost invisible at first, like the faint sigh of wind before dawn. The climate, that ancient storyteller of the planet, began to whisper new verses. The air grew warmer in some regions, cooler in others. Ocean currents shifted slightly, carrying different songs of salt and warmth. Ice sheets, resting at the poles since the end of the last glaciation, began to thin and sigh, melting drop by drop into the sea. It was not sudden. The world turned slowly, as if testing its balance. The grasses still swayed in the wind, and the herds still crossed the plains in timeless rhythm. But the line between the seasons blurred just a little. Winters softened. Summers stretched longer. The timing of rains began to change. High in the Arctic, where silence ruled, ancient glaciers wept under the gentle touch of the sun. Rivers formed from their meltwater, carrying minerals and memories into the sea. Each droplet that joined the ocean carried the faint echo of an ice age, the story of a world once colder, now learning warmth again. The seas rose softly, not in anger, but in inevitability. Islands shrank at their edges. Coastal marshes filled with new life as fish and seabirds found fresh feeding grounds. Mangrove trees spread their roots deeper into brackish water, catching sediment and sheltering small crabs. It was as if the earth, knowing change was coming, was already preparing its soft defences, adapting in calm, not fear. Across continents, forests responded too. In some places, trees marched slowly northward, chasing cooler air. Seeds carried by wind or bird found new ground, new sunlight, new space to grow. Old forests thinned, but new ones rose. Even as the temperature shifted, life adjusted, patient, flexible, ancient in its wisdom. But the warmth did more than move trees and water. It changed the rhythm of life itself. The tundras that once slept beneath frost began to bloom. Mosses and lichens gave way to grasses and flowers. Caribou grazed on new meadows that stretched where ice once ruled. Birds arrived earlier each year, guided by instincts older than memory. In Africa, monsoons shifted with the tilt of the earth. Lakes filled and emptied like lungs. The Sahara, once green then dry then green again, continued its ancient cycle, reminding all who watched that deserts too have their seasons. Everywhere there was movement, slow, steady, endless. The oceans, as always, were the first to feel the change. Warm currents reached farther north, brushing the edges of icy seas. Coral reefs, sensitive to the smallest difference in temperature, began to glow faintly before fading, their colours softening like watercolour left in rain. Some reefs found refuge in deeper water, where light was dim but the heat less sharp. Others vanished quietly, leaving behind skeletons of limestone and memory. And yet, even in loss, the sea made room for renewal. New species found homes among the remnants. Tiny plankton adapted their shells to changing chemistry. Whales shifted their migrations, following the movements of krill that drifted along invisible highways. The ocean's breath never stopped. It merely changed its tempo, like music slowing but never ceasing. Far above, the sky carried signs of the earth's shifting pulse. The air grew thicker with moisture in some places, thinner in others. Storms drifted farther than they once did. Lightning illuminated skies that had not known such brightness in centuries. Yet after every storm, calm always returned. A quiet that stretched like soft silk across the horizon. The animals of the Holocene were listeners to this great change. They moved when the land told them to, rested when it grew still. Wolves followed reindeer along new paths. Birds found new resting places on their migrations. Even insects felt the pull of change. The timing of their hatching altered by a few gentle degrees of warmth. In the oceans, fish found cooler depths. In the mountains, goats climbed higher for tender grass. Every creature, in its own small way, adjusted. It was not panic, it were memory. The earth had changed before. The Cenozoic had seen ice and flame, drought and flood, darkness and bloom, and each time life had found a way to continue, not through force, but through patience. And among all this quiet shifting, humans began to notice. For thousands of years they had trusted the Earth's patterns, the coming of rains, the rise of rivers, the turning of stars. But now those patterns began to change in ways that felt unfamiliar. Summers seemed longer. The snow line retreated. The animals they hunted appeared in new places or vanished altogether. So they adapted too. They built new tools, found new paths, learned new crops. They stored water when rains grew scarce and built terraces on hillsides to keep the soil from washing away. They became not only watchers of the earth, but caretakers, shaping landscapes to protect them, even as they took from them. The bond between humans and nature deepened, though not always evenly. Some cultures learned to live with the rhythm of the land, planting by moonlight and harvesting by the signs of the wind. Others pushed harder, clearing forests and channeling rivers, trying to hold time still. Yet even then, the earth whispered gently beneath their feet, reminding them that change is the oldest law of all, and within the heart of this living planet a new pattern emerged. The Anthropocene, though not yet named, began to shimmer faintly at the horizon. It was not a rupture, but a continuation, another chapter in the long story of the Cenozoic, when the breath of the earth began to mingle more deeply with the breath of humankind. The two had always been linked, but now their songs overlapped. When humans lit fires to warm themselves, the air carried that warmth farther. When they ploughed soil, the rivers changed their paths. When they built cities, stone and heat gathered where forests once stood. The planet noticed, not in judgment, but in balance. For every field cleared, grass grew elsewhere. For every tree felled, seeds drifted on the wind, finding new soil to root in. For every sound of hammer and forge, the earth answered with bird song at dawn. The dance continued, delicate and vast. As centuries turned, the world's climate system, that intricate web of air and ocean, began to respond more quickly. Greenhouse gases, once locked in ice or stone, returned to the sky. Carbon, ancient and patient, found its way back into the light. The planet warmed a little more, like a slow inhale before another long exhale. And yet, even now, the balance had not broken. It wavered, yes, but it held, because balance is not stillness. It is motion that knows its own rhythm. The Earth had learned through eons that stability is not a frozen thing, but a conversation between all living parts. The forest continued to breathe. The oceans continued to rise and fall. The wind continued to sculpt the sand, and the rivers continued to carve their paths. The glaciers still gleamed in places where the sun could not reach, holding their light like the treasure. At night, the stars remained the same. Constellations hung over mountains and seas, just as they had for all of human memory. They watched silently as they always had, their ancient light taking thousands of years to reach the eyes of those who gazed upward. They were reminders of time beyond weather, beyond history, the calm beyond change. In that stillness, life continued to unfold. Whales sang across oceans, their deep voices resonating through the water like the planet's own music. Turtles still returned to the same beaches to lay their eggs. Forests still swayed to the rhythm of the wind. The earth, though shifting, was still deeply, profoundly alive. And perhaps that was the truest lesson of the Holocene's closing breath, that change is not the opposite of peace, it is the movement of peace itself, the way life flows from one form to another, without ever truly ending. The warmth that melts the ice also feeds the rain. The rain that floods the valley also nourishes the seed. The seed that grows into a tree becomes a home for countless lives. And when the tree falls, its wood feeds the soil that gives rise to another. In this way, the earth dreams of eternity. It does not fear change. It moves through it like a river moves through stone, slow, patient, inevitable. And as the night deepens, the same quiet breath that filled the first forests still drifts across the world. It moves through the leaves, through the mountains, through the oceans, and into our own lungs. We are part of that same exhale. The Holocene hums softly, its rhythm steady, even as it leans toward transformation. It knows that all things, stars, seas, species, and souls must one day change form. But in that change there is beauty. In that beauty there is peace. The story of the Cenozoic continues, written not in stone but in air, in the slow pulse of tides in the quiet of night. And somewhere in the vastness of this living planet, the earth turns once more toward dawn, calm, knowing, eternal. The Holocene had been patient, carrying life through millennia with a quiet stability, but the earth was never still for long. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, humans began to leave their mark. At first it was only whispers, a cleared forest here, a ploughed field there, smoke curling up from the first permanent fires. The planet felt the touch, but it did not complain. It simply adapted, like a tree bending under the wind, yet holding its roots deep in the soil. People had learned to live with the rhythm of the world. They planted seeds and watched them grow. They followed the migrations of animals and the cycles of rivers. They knew the seasons by the movement of the sun and the moon. And in this intimate observation, they discovered another kind of awareness, the understanding that every action echoes through the quiet architecture of life. The first cities rose slowly, not in haste, but like islands of stone and clay in a sea of green. Along the banks of rivers, bricks were laid in careful rows. Homes were built with respect for water and wind. Roads wound like gentle veins across the land. The smell of baked clay and the sound of water striking riverbanks mingled with the hum of animals, the calls of birds, the rustle of leaves. Civilization in its infancy was a soft part of the planet's breathing. Fire, too, began to shape the world. Its warmth made long nights possible, and its light extended the reach of human curiosity. With fire came food cooked, homes warmed, and stories told in its flickering glow. The smoke drifted upward, marking human presence in the sky. It mingled with clouds and drifted across forests and rivers, touching the branches of distant trees, the peaks of mountains, the wide stretch of ocean. Even the smallest ember carried the echo of change. People began to domesticate animals, forming bonds with creatures that would follow them across the plains, hills, and valleys. Dogs padded silently beside humans, learning their rhythms. Goats and sheep wandered under gentle care, grazing the same meadows humans tended. Cattle filled the fields, their slow chewing a meditation on patience and quiet growth. Every living thing, from the largest herd to the tiniest insect, became part of the shared web, a participant in the soft unfolding of life. In this early Anthropocene, humans noticed that the world had layers, living, breathing layers that touched each other invisibly. The forests affected the rivers affected the coasts affected the winds, and the wind carried messages between all of them, messages that only those who listened carefully could hear, and humans listened, sometimes instinctively, sometimes through observation passed down from generations. They began to build knowledge, not books yet, but memory and skill. The movement of animals guided hunting, the timing of rains guided planting, the phases of the moon guided fishing. The earth itself became a teacher, and people were attentive students, learning the rhythms of every leaf, stream, and stone. Even as villages grew into towns, the planet's pulse remained steady. Cities were small, quiet, tucked beside rivers and coasts where nature could still be seen and touched. Children played in fields of wheat, their laughter echoing across low hills. Farmers listened to birds and frogs to know the coming of rains. Fishermen drifted along gentle waves, their nets weaving into the currents like extensions of the sea itself. Across continents, trade began in quiet, deliberate ways. Sails caught the wind on calm oceans. Pack animals carried seeds, tools, and stories over mountain passes. Roads traced soft curves along valleys. Goods travelled slowly, but knowledge travelled faster. Knowledge of crops, animals, and the patterns of climate. Humans began to connect distant parts of the world, weaving together ecosystems not only with movement but with observation, learning that the health of one place could affect another. In time, humans noticed that even small actions mattered. When forests were cleared too quickly, the rivers changed their course. When overfishing occurred, tides seemed emptier and quieter. When fire burned too fiercely, the soil could no longer cradle new seeds. Slowly, they learned to temper their touch, to move in gentle concert with the earth. They were no longer merely visitors, they were participants. The planet too responded, rivers adapted, Forests regrew, animals found new paths, new places to nest, new ways to survive. Even the seas, vast and patient, shifted currents in response to warmth, cold, and the smallest human influence. The world had learned that balance is not perfection, but flexibility, a soft breathing equilibrium maintained through tension, care, and patience. And yet this period also carried the first echoes of greater change to come. Metals were mined from stone, wheels turned on roads, carrying goods faster than ever before. Boats crossed oceans more regularly. Human settlements grew denser, stretching into places that had been quiet for thousands of years. The earth noticed, as it had always did, in subtle ways. Winds shifted, rains varied, rivers meandered in slightly new paths, mountains held the snow differently, and seas reflected the sun in changed patterns. Even so, life continued. The Holocene rhythms did not vanish. The forest still whispered in the wind. The ocean still pulsed with currents. The animals adapted their paths, sometimes closer to humans, sometimes farther. Birds still migrated, fish still swam, wolves and foxes still wandered the forests. Life found harmony again as it always did, even in the presence of change. Humans began to cultivate beauty as well as survival. Gardens appeared beside homes, filled with flowers, herbs and fruits. Temples rose among trees, their stones warmed by the sun, echoing with the soft music of prayer and song. Art, music, and dance became another way of listening to the earth's rhythm. In every brushstroke, drum beat, or carved shape, humans honoured the pulse of the world. The sky continued to play its role as guardian and guide. Clouds drifted across valleys and oceans, carrying moisture to thirsty lands. The moon and stars remained constant companions, guiding migrations, planting, and nightly rest. Storms came as teachers, not tyrants, showing the limits of human action and the resilience of natural balance. Even in this early Anthropocene, the Earth's patience was remarkable. It absorbed smoke, waste, and movement with slow grace. It allowed humans to grow, to build, to explore, and to learn, yet always reminded them of limits. Every fire burned a little brighter, every river a little deeper, every breeze a little stronger. A soft communication between the living planet and the beings it nurtured. And in that communication, humans discovered wonder. They learned to watch clouds for signs of rain. They observed tides for hidden fish. They traced animal tracks across fields, reading the stories left in the mud and sand. They learned that life is never isolated. Each living thing is a part of a greater song, a melody of interdependence. Even the smallest creatures mattered. Bees, carrying pollen from flower to flower, became part of the rhythm of agriculture. Worms turned soil quietly, unseen but essential. Tiny fish maintained the balance of rivers. The quiet hum of life across species and continents became a lullaby of survival, cooperation, and adaptation. The early Anthropocene was not loud. It did not roar. It whispered across the planet in gentle ways. Human hands shaping the land, human breath mingling with air, human light blending with fire and sun. It was the Earth's most subtle awakening to itself, the realization that one species could touch the whole world, but only softly, only patiently. And so the Holocene continued, intertwined with the soft echo of human presence. It was not perfect, but it was balanced in its own quiet, enduring way. Rivers continued to hum, forests to breathe, animals to roam, oceans to swell and recede. Humans walked among it all, learning to listen, learning to move with the rhythm, learning that the calmest strength is patience. Time, as always, remained a slow river. It carried the memory of ice, of warmth, of oceans, of mountains. It carried the stories of mammals, birds, and insects. And it carried the soft, attentive presence of humans, students of the planet, participants in its eternal dance. And in the night, under the vast, watchful stars, the earth rested in its long, deep calm. The rivers sang, the trees whispered, the ocean swayed, and the world, ever patient, ever alive, continued its quiet story, one of balance, adaptation, and the gentle echo of life itself. Humans had learned to move gently through the earth's rhythms, listening to the soft pulse of wind, water, and life. And yet, as numbers grew, as villages became towns and towns became cities, Their presence began to ripple across landscapes in ways both subtle and profound. It was not abrupt, not violent. It was a slow, careful shaping like fingers pressing softly into clay, leaving gentle marks that the world accepted, adapted to, and sometimes returned in new forms. Fields stretched across valleys where wild grass had once ruled. Wheat, barley, and rice grew in neat lines, swaying in the breeze with a rhythm almost human in its order. Irrigation channels carried water carefully from rivers, winding through fields like silver threads. The soil, rich with the breath of life, held seeds and roots in patient embrace. Humans learned to tend this soil, turning it gently, enriching it with compost, resting it when it needed sleep. Along riverbanks, settlements rose in harmony with the water. Wooden homes, clay huts, and later stone structures reflected sunlight in warm tones. Smoke curled from hearths into morning air, mingling with the mist rising off the rivers. Children played at the water's edge, their laughter joining the song of flowing streams. Boats floated lightly, carrying people and goods, connecting settlements in quiet networks of trade and conversation. The forests, which had once stretched unbroken across continents, responded in subtle ways. Some areas thinned, giving way to farmland, while others grew denser, retreating into hills, mountains, and marshes. Trees along the edges of cleared land adapted to sunlight and wind, their branches stretching higher to capture what remained. Birds found new niches in orchards and gardens. Deer and foxes learned to move between fields and woods, cautious but present, part of a world that was slowly changing yet still breathing in rhythm. Mountains too felt the touch of humans. Paths were carved into slopes for travel and trade. Stones were shaped and stacked for dwellings, walls, and sacred spaces. Water from mountain springs was guided gently into terraced fields. Even in these small touches, the earth responded. Streams adjusted their flow, soil retained its richness, and life adapted to the new patterns of human presence. The oceans continued their patient dance. Fishing boats skimmed the waves, gathering sustenance without breaking the vastness of the sea. Shellfish beds were harvested, but currents and tides carried their larvae to new grounds. Dolphins swam alongside vessels, unafraid, and whales continued their slow migrations across the deep singing songs older than human memory. The water remembered the touch of humans, but did not resist. It simply moved with the rhythm of life, adjusting its tides, waves, and currents with quiet grace. In the grasslands, large herbivores still roamed in the spaces humans left open. Buffalo herds migrated in patterns shaped by both instinct and human hunting. Wolves and other predators followed their prey, maintaining the ancient balance. Even in areas where humans farmed, small pockets of wilderness persisted, breathing and humming with life that had always been there. It was a delicate choreography, every species learning to coexist with the other, every movement tuned to the rhythm of the Holocene. And humans in turn learned from these movements. They observed animal migrations, predicting when to plant and when to harvest. They noticed the flowering of trees and the timing of rains. They learned that life is not controlled but guided, that balance is maintained not by force but by attention. They began to cultivate knowledge as carefully as they cultivated land. The skies reflected these changes. Clouds gathered and drifted over farmlands and forests alike, bringing gentle rains to nourish the earth. Storms still came, but humans learned to respect them, understanding their role in the cycle of soil, river, and crop. The moon waxed and waned above, its phases guiding planting and festivals. The stars, constant and patient, marked the passage of time, reminding all who watched that life, like the sky, moves in long, gentle patterns. Even the smallest creatures became important teachers. Bees carried pollen from flowers to fields, sustaining both wild and cultivated plants. Earthworms turned soil beneath human feet, aerating the ground, making it fertile. Fish, amphibians, and insects continued their quiet cycles, moving with water and wind, guiding human understanding of ecology long before it had a name. In the cities, people learned to create beauty and meaning in harmony with life. Temples rose beside rivers, their stones warmed by sunlight, echoing with soft music and chants. Gardens bloomed in courtyards, humming with bees and fluttering butterflies. Streets wound in gentle curves, not straight lines, reflecting the natural contours of land and river. Light from fires and early lamps mingled with sunlight, creating soft shadows that danced like the world itself was breathing. Trade, travel, and knowledge expanded, but always in the patient rhythm of the earth. Sails drifted across oceans, guided by stars and winds. Caravans traced desert dunes and mountain passes. Seeds, stories, and ideas moved quietly, connecting distant lands in invisible threads. Humans learned to weave themselves into the planet's patterns, to travel without forcing, to take without breaking, to observe without erasing. The rivers, those eternal storytellers, continued to sing. They wound around cities and forests alike, carrying the essence of mountains to oceans, the memory of glaciers to the seas. Fish moved upstream and downstream, oblivious to human hands yet guided by currents shaped in part by human irrigation and settlements. Every drop of water held memory, of rain, of snow, of soil, and carried it gently forward. And the earth, as always, adapted. Floodplains shifted slightly. Wetlands grew in quiet corners. Forest edges thickened or thinned, according to light, wind, and soil. Even the dust carried on the wind told stories of distant deserts, distant mountains, distant oceans, connecting continents in ways unseen but deeply felt. Animals continued to adapt too. Birds nested in orchards and rooftops. Wolves and foxes moved carefully at the edge of farmland. Fish found new currents and migration paths in response to human activity. Every species, small or large, found ways to coexist with the presence of humans, learning to move alongside their rhythm. And humans in turn learned humility. They discovered that the world responds best not to force but to care. Fields left fallow replenished the soil. Rivers guided gently by terraces and canals enriched the land instead of draining it. Trees were planted to stabilize soil, provide shade and feed both humans and animals. Gardens and forests became living classrooms of balance and attention. Even in the full bloom of human presence, the Holocene maintained its quiet heartbeat. The planet's pulse remained patient and steady, carrying the soft rhythms of life forward. Winds, oceans, forests, rivers, and creatures moved in harmony with one another, each aware of the other in ways that humans were only beginning to understand. Time as always stretched gently. It carried the memory of ice ages, the warmth of Holocene summers, and the quiet lessons of glaciers, rivers, mountains, and oceans. Humans, growing in number and awareness, became part of this memory, not as rulers but as participants. Their hands shaped the land, but their hearts learned to follow its rhythm. And as night fell over fields, forests, and rivers, the stars emerged once more. They shone over human cities and wild landscapes alike. They watched over the oceans and mountains, over migrating animals and rivierae, over every living thing connected in the quiet pulse of life. They were reminders that the world's story is ancient, patient, and continuous, a story written not only in stone and water, but in breath and rhythm. The Holocene continued to hum softly beneath the touch of humans. It whispered lessons of balance, patience, and care. It carried forward the echoes of life across continents, oceans, and skies. It reminded all who listened that influence is not domination, that growth is not destruction, and that harmony is a careful, patient act of observation and respect. And somewhere in the quiet of the night, the earth breathed. Rivers flowed. Leaves rustled. Ocean waves shimmered in moonlight. The wind carried the faint scent of soil, rain, and salt. The animals moved gently through the fields and forests. Humans rested, watched the stars, and dreamed, part of the endless calm stream of a living planet. The Cenozoic, from fire to ice, from mammals to humans, had reached a point of tender balance. The Holocene, with its warmth and calm, continued to nurture life. And in this gentle shaping, every leaf, every river, every wave, and every heartbeat joined together in a lullaby of existence, a song older than memory, softer than wind, and infinitely patient.